Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back to Equine Assisted World. I've got a legend with me, Mary Wanless. Those of you who grew up with riding through the 80s and into the 90s will know her very well and her programs. Those of you who came in more recently may not. And if you don't, you should, because Mary's been at the forefront of, I would say, the movement to bring riding back into the humanities and to humanize the whole process and make it more accessible, and moving away from the old models of, an instructor yelling at a student and hoping that by increasing the decibel level, things will somehow get better, and actually looking at biomechanics, actually looking at what's going on in the mind, actually looking at equine and human well-being and so on, and putting that together. And one can think these days that that's a no-brainer. Of course we do all that. But it wasn't always so. And these conversations were a bit taboo, actually, back in the day. And it was pioneering people who were not afraid to be snickered at and laughed at, and perhaps a little bit even looked down upon for taking an alternative approach, who of course are now the mentors that we all look to. And Mary is one of them. So let's find out about how she can help us with us and our endeavors in the equine assisted world to provide well-being to humans and horses together. So welcome, Mary. And can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Gosh, well, I'm a riding coach, and I have had a big part in creating the field of rider biomechanics, largely because I grew up with instructors that kind of shouted louder at the natives and couldn't tell anybody how to do it. It was do it now, do it again, do it more, do it better, do it because I said so. And clearly I had no talent and that wasn't going to work. So I was a passionate horse kid and begged for riding lessons for 10 years, and eventually, when I was 14, got myself on the back of a horse. And it kind of went from there. But it became apparent to me, well, early on, I just thought like I was stupid and incapable and not talented, which, I'm certainly not talented. I'm not quite stupid. And some spheres, I'm pretty incapable. But I set out to try and find out what talented riders were doing that they didn't say they were doing. Mm-hmm. But that only happened after I'd had a crisis where I actually gave up riding in despair. And it required that giving up for me to look at it from first principles and look at it in a way with a physicist's brain. I have a degree in physics. And go, what's going on here? There have to be rules of cause and effect. How the heck does this work?
You sound like Elon Musk.
Not quite, no.
That's apparently his thing. First principles, let's go back. But you're right. First principles are very useful. And I think a physicist's eye in this is really helpful, because what are we dealing with here if not physics, the natural world, and how things move through time and space? Talk to us about that despair, and why did it come? What did you do about it? And how did it lead you to your present work?
So I hadn't done much more than hairy ponies and muddy fields and a few riding holidays before I went to university, and arrived at Bristol. And with a friend, we set about in our second year really trying to make the riding club more open to other people. And the riding club gave me much more experience of different places, different people, riding arenas, clipped horses. And I did my AI during my first summer vacation. So that's the assistant instructor's exam as it was then, for those of you who aren't British and old enough to know. And I just about passed that. And it was a sequence of events that got me doing that, because basically my mother had died when I was 16. My dad died when I was 18 during my first term at university. And so I actually had nowhere to go for the summer vacation.
Wow.
When my friend said, well, why don't you go to the place where I kept my pony and work and see if you can get your AI? So I had nothing better to do, and I loved the idea of being around horses. So that was what I did, and got to ride on some of the university teams. But it tended to be that we had 3 in a team, and I was number 4. But we were we divvied out these places in teams in the unimportant competitions. So I did get to ride a bit. And when I left university, I decided to take a year out and play with horses. And I thought I'd, quote, get it out of my system. That was the plan. And it didn't work. And I'd got a place to go back and do postgrad teacher training. Sorry?
I seem to remember saying that to myself once. Yeah.
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 Get it out of my system. So I took a year off after I graduated to play with horses and get it out of my system. I had a place to go back to Bristol and do postgrad teacher training, which I did. And I lasted about 6 weeks. And during that time, I started getting headaches and I was feeling pretty miserable. And I had the biggest blinding flash of light experience I've ever had, which was I don't actually give a damn or a toss if kids don't understand Newton's laws. And I quit and played around with youth schemes, working in youth clubs and with unemployed youth. And
why? Why'd you do that?
I needed money.
Yeah, but you could have made money in a dozen ways. Why that?
It seemed doable. Well, I think I was a pretty vulnerable young person, the whole situation of my upbringing and then my parents' deaths cast a big shadow. So I had an empathy with people who were vulnerable. And I guess I saw some ads somewhere. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I could have tried working in a shop or something like that. It was something I could do that was a shift here and a shift there and largely evenings. And a friend and I were owning a horse between us. She was doing the postgrad teacher training. And it just wouldn't have worked without me having more time. Actually, we went into it incredibly optimistic in terms of how much you can study and have a horse and make it work. So that's a good question. Why did I do that? I saw some ads. It felt like something I could do.
Okay. How long did you do that for? And what kind of work with these young people did you do?
I did a couple of evenings a week in a youth club.
Doing what?
Hanging out with mostly the girls.
Talking.
I ended up with a little dance class going. I'd done a lot of ballet in my youth and then some other dance and expressive kind of non-structured dance. So I ended up with a little dance class with the girls.
What year is this?
It's 1975.
Okay.
And then in the youth clubs, it was just kind of hanging out with the guys and playing snooker with them and things like that. It wasn't a very helpful program, I don't think.
And you weren't terribly much older than them either.
No, I wasn't.
You were more of a contemporary.
No, I was 22, 23.
Yeah. And I'm just casting my mind back to there, and that's when I was at primary school. But I'm thinking, oh yes, ABBA, Queen is big in the charts. People have the 70s haircuts. Football hooliganism is suddenly a conversation. But there was
trousers.
Yeah, flared trousers. But there was disco. But there was still I feel there was still a kind of an optimism to that decade.
I never felt caught up in the 70s pessimism. Economically, it was difficult. I was doing my own thing in my own little world. I really wasn't listening to news and I didn't have a very whole worldly perspective. And in many ways, I was taken up with myself as a somewhat troubled person.
Okay.
And horses and kids, and that was my world.
I'm also just thinking now, looking outside the window and seeing the first punks coming by in 1977 and realizing that the world had changed, perhaps in a better way.
Punks, but
say what?
I missed the whole punk thing.
Oh, there's always time. There's always time, Mary. Punk's not dead. But why were you vulnerable growing up? What were the vulnerabilities and what were you carrying with you? Because I think this will really help us in this equine assisted conversation to understand.
I think part of it was being born into a family where my mum and dad had very little education and thought education was the answer to everything.
Okay.
And
so some pressure there.
There was a lot of pressure. Now, I'm very sure now that I'm dyslexic. At the time, dyslexia didn't exist. I was called careless if I got things back to front and upside down. I'm left-handed. You had to write with a fountain pen in those days. It's hard to write with a fountain pen and not get your hand over the writing and make a mess, you know?
Yeah.
I was messy. I got things back to front. I think I may also be ADHD. I'm not so sure on that, but I'm definitely capable of the hyperfocus. It's part of that. And I worked really hard in school. I mean, I have a very smart oldest brother, really seriously smart oldest brother. And then a brother who was in his shadow and really wasn't very academic. And I was kind of trying hard, following up quite a few years behind, seeing how well it didn't work out for my middle brother, who kind of went, I'm not into this. And, I did pretty well, got loads of O levels and Bible A levels, got into a good university. I could do maths much better than I could do English and arts. Although I shocked myself and everybody, I think, by getting A's in English literature and English language at O level. The spelling gods must have been with me on those days. I don't know, but that was an almighty shock. But I got myself backed into a corner where physics and maths was what I did at O level, at A level, and then it's what you do at university. But so the pressure academically was really difficult. And, I did get a place at a direct grant school. So I must have done well enough in the 11 plus.
Well, yeah, Bristol University, sure. Yeah.
But it was all a struggle. It was a real struggle. And it was a very rigid and very religious family.
What brand of religion?
My mother used the whole religious thing in quite a nasty way. There was a lot of shame.
Talk to us about that.
Sorry?
Talk to us about that as best you can. I presume this was, Christianity, but what form? How did the shaming work?
She was a Christian Scientist.
Okay.
Which is not well known. And, if you were ill, you had to get your thinking straight. And so there was a whole punitive level about being ill or being not perfect. I think she wanted to pretend she didn't have a body and bodies didn't exist. She then, when I was 14, became quite ill and had cancer and didn't have treatment until it was too late. I can imagine there were major arguments between my father and her.
He was not a Christian Scientist.
He towed the line.
Okay.
And during, there's more family history to this too. During the First World War, my mother's mother, as I understand it, lost 7 male members of the family.
Okay.
Or family friends. And she had a breakdown.
Okay. And
then in the Second World War, so my mum was a child during the First World War. I was the child of their older age. And during the Second World War, my dad had his own business and he was firefighting at night in the Blitz in London. And my mum took over running his shop.
Which was what kind of shop?
Sorry?
What kind of shop was it?
It was sports and leather goods, nothing horsey, but sports, leather goods, Subbuteo football. Do you remember Subbuteo football?
I do remember Subbuteo.
Little footballers.
First role-playing games,
Them and, football boots and shirts for the local schools, fishing tackle, fireworks at the right time of year. I have memories of being knee-high to a grasshopper looking at the fireworks in the firework cabinet. And we got to buy them with our pocket money at cost price. We had the best firework parties in our street.
So your dad was, so he was firefighting in the Blitz. He's a shopkeeper coming up through the Blitz in the war. They're older when they have you.
Yes.
Mum is Christian Scientist.
So mum, whilst in hospital during the war, I think there was a Christian Science visitor. And that got her into an okay functioning state, kind of.
Something to cling to.
So I think my dad wouldn't challenge it because it was too fundamental to her okayness.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't a very okay version of okay.
Are there things, I don't know much about Christian Science stuff. Are there things you're not allowed to do? Are there taboos? Are there big no-nos?
Oh, there's no drinking, no drugs, no gods before me.
No fun.
Supposedly no coffee. My mom did have a cup of coffee every day, but supposedly no coffee, nothing that could be addictive or whatever. So it is a pretty strict regime by most people's standards.
So not a bundle of laughs.
Not a bundle of laughs, no. Not a bundle of laughs.
And then
I had the odd moment where I felt like I got it.
Okay.
And understood it. And nowadays, X years on, would have a philosophy which is not that different, but doesn't have the punitive element to it.
Tell me about the punitive element. I mean, is it the standard Christian punitive element, I toe the line or go to hell, or something more than that?
There wasn't a lot of talk about hell. I think my mum must have had a lot of this growing up in her childhood and a lot of shame. And anything we did that, crossed a boundary for her, I mean, we got it. When her shame got triggered, we got it.
And when you got it, that would be being screamed at, she'd hit you,
No, there was nothing physical, but it was kind of being yelled at in get your thinking straight. I thought I knew you. Who do you think you are? La, 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 la. Yeah.
Effectively, you're a bad person, at least in this moment. Yeah.
Yes, there was an awful lot of you are a bad person.
Yeah.
And, there was nothing for it in the end but to come back, capitulate, apologize, and
appease.
And I think it was partly, and in a way, I do wonder if she was pretty much a narcissist. She never apologized for anything. She didn't do anything wrong.
Well, people didn't in those days, though.
Boy, did we.
It was the culture, wasn't it? I mean, nobody.
It was the culture. Yes, it was the culture. Parents were perfect. Children were to be made in an image that wasn't me. I mean, this woman had 2 boys, desperately wanted a little girl. Her story was she had to wait however many years before she could bear the fact she might have a 3rd boy. I think that was a cover-up story. I think it was all an accident, probably. She was 43 when I was born.
Okay.
And then she got the wrong little girl.
Why were you the wrong little girl?
I didn't like wearing dresses. I didn't like, I'd learned to sew, I learned to cook, I was okay with all of those things. Actually, the place where my mother supported me the most was doing creative things, even if what I was doing was gluing together cotton wool balls and making little things and sticking feet on them. She'd go, oh, that's lovely. So she actually really supported me in doing things like that. Crochet, I did lots, made my own clothes, did lots of those kind of things. And actually would have been way more suited to doing something creative than trying to be an academic, which I really wasn't. And now I think I fall between 2 stools because the real academic horse world doesn't think I'm academic enough and the average rider thinks I'm too academic.
Well, it's always, I think, a good sign if you're pissing off both sides of the camp. Then it means
it probably
you're probably doing something. Okay, so one of the reasons I would sort of go into this and start asking you all these questions is because obviously, I think this is something a lot of young people struggle with. A lot of, and when I say young people, we're all the same young people that we always were, and we're all the same lost 8-year-old, and we're all the same, over anxious, wanting to please 3-year-old, and we're also the joyful child, and we're also the curious kid and adolescent. I feel we carry all of our past selves with us, and then we hit adulthood, and well, there they all are. And so it's interesting to me that, without thinking, for those listeners who, obviously you couldn't hear our conversation before we hit record, but, Mary was saying, well, I'm not really, am I that qualified to talk about equine assisted? And I was like, yeah, I think you probably are, and when as soon as anybody begins to look at, I think particularly in the horse world, if you kind of had to battle your way into it a little bit like you did, I did too, there's usually a reason, and it's to do with the pursuit of a certain kind of happiness and joy and freedom, which means that one's current situation perhaps isn't that. And so I think a lot of people can relate to this. And then there you are finding yourself doing this youth work in Bristol. Synchronicities aren't always conscious. One doesn't always recognize them. But I would say that your work has made life a lot better for a lot of anxious, self-questioning riders who are feeling lost. And I don't think you would have
Yes.
had that empathy if you hadn't gone through
Yes. Yeah.
something
That's
like you just
absolutely
described.
true.
You would have had
And
no reason to do it, right?
it's interesting, the kids that are born horse mad, isn't it? I was one of them. My family were appalled. It was outside of their experience. My father had a cousin actually who was very horsey and lived her life being a cook or a housekeeper for some of the horsey known names actually of that generation before me. And the family joke was, you'll turn out like Auntie Minor if you get around horses. She was probably saner than the rest of the family, but there you go. But, I just picked horses out of picture books as a kid. We had a budgerigar, but weren't really allowed animals otherwise. I had a guinea
You
pig.
were in North London, right?
No, I grew up in West London. I grew up out near Uxbridge, the end of the Piccadilly in the
Okay, well,
Metropolitan.
back then that was effectively countryside. I mean,
It was right on the edge.
Yeah.
We had bikes. We could go out in woods. I mean,
but
we
there
had
would have been
fantastic
horses in
freedom.
fields around.
Sorry?
There would have been horses in fields around you.
There were horses in fields around that I didn't get very near, but there were horses in fields around. Yes. And I just loved them. And I mean, still do. And the level of beauty and power and grace and willingness to let us play with them and be around them, it still moves me to tears. I mean,
That's miraculous. I agree.
it's phenomenal.
Had
And I
there been horsey
understand,
people back in the day, even people, previous generations, people who'd been with working horses perhaps, or drovers, because back then, even when I was a kid in London, I grew up in Islington, which is central North London. There were a lot of horses around. I mean, the rag and bone men were out always
Yes.
with their horse and carts. The hansom cab taxi drivers often kept still horses in muses in inner London, and you'd see them out in the early mornings exercising their horses. A lot of riders on Hampstead Heath. It wasn't just Hyde Park. It's dwindled now, but it was around.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were rag and bone men that came past our school, and we'd always try and look out the windows, which were so high you couldn't see out of them. And a friend and I had a diary of what horse came past at what time on what day.
That clip-clop sound, the sound of freedom.
Yes.
Still to this day. Okay, but as far as you know, you didn't have someone in the ancestry who...
As far as I know, just my father's cousin was
Yeah.
the only horsey person. I really don't know. I don't think it would have happened in my mother's family. If it had happened, it would have been my father's family. But I don't think so.
And I presume you must have begged for riding lessons.
I begged. Believe me, I begged.
Deaf ears?
Deaf ears. And it kind of, I was fortunate. A friend moved. She and I used to play horses on two low brick walls that were the side of her porch outside her front door, and we made saddles and we made bridles and we rode these things. She then moved away to the country and started riding and invited me to come and stay, and did I want to go riding? And you bet I did. So my parents capitulated on that one and went, oh my goodness, you better have a hat. And by the time I got the hat, I'd kind of done the deal.
Good.
And the story always was, we can't afford it. And then I had a cousin who was younger than me who started having lessons, and clearly her family had less money than my family. So that argument wasn't very sustainable any longer. So I got to have riding lessons.
Interesting to me that, because as you know now, being a career in horses, like with me, you know that if a kid shows up who's keen, most horsey people will go out of their way to initiate them into the cult. We horsey people are a bit evangelical that way. So money's almost never a barrier. But what I do see so often, and I can feel it in the heart of the little girl that you were, is that crushing of the dream and giving somebody the message, well, your dreams aren't worthy and are also not attainable. And then you either go like you did, where you say, well, they jolly well are, and I'm jolly well I am going to somehow, some way, and it feeds the fire. Or quite often people don't, they give up.
Yes.
And I often think that's incredibly sad. One of the lines of work we do a lot with the more dressage side of what we do outside of the equine assisted side is a lot of people who come to riding late because they had that dream as kids and had to wait 40 years to make some money to finally do it. And that hurt little person is always in there. And I do think that that's one of the real benefits of your work, because I think by clarifying and making accessible this complex business of keeping a horse between you and the ground in some sort of sense of harmony, which is usually so steeped in esoteric, badly communicated, also punitive approaches, you really do help, I think, people, perhaps unwittingly. I think you do help a lot of people heal those old wounds. Can you tell us now, talk to us about Ride With Your Mind. Talk to us about, I want you to jump forward to kind of your mid-career, what you do. Then I want you to dial back again and talk about the evolution into that.
So in my mid-career, I had written a couple of books. I was writing more books. I was teaching courses here and there. I'd got myself to Wiltshire by that time and was able to use a big competition centre there for my courses. After that, got my own place, but there was 10 years of Wiltshire before that. And really, it was born of people need to know this. This needs to be known. It needs to be known because it makes explicit what is otherwise implicit, can't be communicated. If a talented rider can't put words on what they do,
Absolutely.
they cannot send that knowledge forward.
Yeah, they're not good teachers usually. No.
They're not good teachers, and our traditional vocabulary is not helpful. And I just kept learning on the job, by riding and trying to figure out my own body and what was going on, and by teaching, and by really asking people's questions. What did I say that helped you the most? How would you, if you had to teach this to somebody, what would you tell them? What was the difference that made the difference? And by that time, I'd done a psychotherapy training. I'd got involved with neurolinguistic programming. I had a training in that. So I had a pretty good idea of how to communicate in ways that were viable. And I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Loving teaching, loving riding, loving writing. Writing less so. Writing's always been the hardest of them in many ways. And just walking a path of following the next thing that really drew my attention, in the reading I was doing and what I was learning outside of horses that then came back in to inform my coaching and my understanding of people and horses.
What were the biggest things? You mentioned neurolinguistic programming, you mentioned psychotherapy there. Talk us through the things that you learned outside of horses, and then I'm going to go back through your classical education with horses, which is quite impressive, and I think will be useful for people in terms of types of mentor to look for. But let's go first to the things outside of horses that informed you being able to communicate and teach well this difficult esoteric thing called riding.
I think neurolinguistic programming was probably the most important of them.
And why did you learn it?
Because I've been involved in psychotherapy and decided to train as a therapist. I didn't really think I would be a therapist. I'm not good at sitting still. But I came intrigued by that field. And I found myself. Why?
Because of your early grief, losing your parents?
Yes, I mean, when I quit riding in despair, I went to London. And I knew I needed to get involved in therapy. So my brother had done that. My best friend had done that.
You needed it yourself.
Sorry?
You needed it yourself.
I needed something to turn my life around, yeah.
Okay.
I was just too miserable too much of the time. And got involved with this training. And what would happen would be there'd be a group of us sitting around this room, and our therapist would do a demonstration with somebody on something and then say, pair up, go do it. And everybody else would walk off looking like they thought they knew how to do it. And I was there going, I've no clue how she did that. I haven't got the first clue. Am I the only stupid one here? Mm-hmm. And anyway, I kept doing the training, but it was really through that kind of, I don't get this. Am I the only stupid one? And I literally picked up a book one of the NLP books in Change's bookshop in Camden Town one day, opened it to a page, and it said, if you want to learn how to do something, go to somebody who struggled to learn it. Don't go to somebody who's the renowned expert. And I went, this book is for me, picked it up, read it, got myself to an NLP seminar and completed the psychotherapy program, but then started going to NLP.
For those listeners who don't know what NLP is, because it used to be that everyone knew what it is, and it's not quite as well known anymore. Can you give us the nuts and bolts? 1, 2, 3. What is NLP?
So it's Richard Bandler and John Grinder. When they started off this, Richard Bandler was trying to work out what made a few renowned therapists so successful. And he drew out patterns in how they used language, how they talked, how they heard other people.
Okay.
And came into understanding and being able to teach some of the nuts and bolts of that kind of process of thinking, how we think, what thinking is made up of, how to play with that kind of thing to change how you feel.
Change the inner language in your head.
Change the inner language in your head, yes. Also change your body to a degree. Now, what I love about the times we're in now is that embodiment is really coming more into mainstream. Maybe not mainstream, but it's less.
I'd say it is. Yeah, it's on its way there.
Yeah. Embodiment is a term that people have heard. The whole thing, I would say, with my riding life has been about becoming more embodied. How through horses and what I do, I have become so much more embodied.
And let's assume we have a listener now going, what's embodied mean when it's at home?
Yes. So what embodied means is
what is that?
Able to really sense your body, to, if you feel something emotionally, to maybe able to track it back to, oh, it's a heaviness in my heart. Oh, it's a tightness in my gut. Yeah. To realize that emotions come from physical and biochemical states. Candice Pert was a really important writer in this field. Molecules of Emotion by Candice Pert was a really big book in this.
Candice who?
Pert, P-E-R-T.
Candice Pert, Molecules of Emotion.
Of Emotion. It was a book of possibly the 80s. And Candice died rather young. I mean, she was pretty crazy. I actually met her. She was pretty crazy and delightful. But she did the science behind the neurochemicals and the lock and key mechanism in cells, that when those neurochemicals get in, that there is that scientific background to what you would then feel subjectively as an emotion.
Okay.
So NLP doesn't work as much with embodiment as I think people deserve. And I think it adds something extra to the NLP, tinkering around with language and the images inside your head, the things you say to yourself.
Yeah, most of us talk to ourselves appallingly. I mean, we don't talk to ourselves like we talk to a friend.
No, we talk to ourselves like our parents talked to us when we were 3.
Yeah,
Stop that, don't do that, you're stupid, what's wrong with you? You know, it's sad but true. And I hope is less in more recent generations. I don't know that it is, but it certainly was my growing up.
Yeah.
And I can remember being on a horse one day after I'd given up riding, gone to London, started teaching again, and riding a horse for somebody. And in my internal dialogue, I heard myself say, I'm going to get this horse going well if it kills me. And then I went, what? If it kills me, is it that important? You know, and there were real turning points in riding when I started to really realize that there was this yatter on in the background that really wasn't helpful, and learn how to switch that off. And now I have very little internal dialogue, actually, whether I'm riding or doing anything. I don't talk to myself much at all.
Okay. You said very glibly there, so I'm just going to make you back up. You said, until I learned how to switch it off.
Switch it off.
Now,
yes.
That is a big thing to learn how to do.
I can teach people how to switch it off.
Okay, so talk to us about that.
Okay.
How do you switch off the negative little voice in your head that's telling you shit all the time?
All right. So there's lots of ways to do that. One is if you hear yourself, so you have to kind of tune into it and listen to it. If you hear yourself saying something not helpful, to say to yourself, next, and have the next thought be something that is helpful. That works really well in riding. Maybe it's more a riding strategy than an everyday life strategy, but you go, God, I ought to be able to do this by now. What's wrong with me? This is going so badly wrong. Next. And the next thought could be something like breathe. And then I have a whole list of things that I might say to people that are little bite-sized chunks of what makes it work. So that would be one way. Another way would be have the voice speak to you with an accent or sing to you in a way that makes it less believable and serious. So if it started to sing in opera, we think you're a really stupid woman. What on earth is wrong with you? How come after all these years? Or it could be Mickey Mouse.
It's so funny you say that. When I had to teach my son Rowan how to drive, he was 16. And you got to understand he had been nonverbal, severely autistic. Okay, now doing amazingly well, but still, teach you how to drive, and I'm terrified. He's terrified. And I said to him, what can I do to make this non-stressful? He said, do it in a silly accent. This came from him.
Right.
And so we cooked up a variety of hours kind of his Texas redneck teacher. And I'd be like, well, we all gonna come down the junction's ass. And I want you to put yours eyes' asses on the road there and look to the right's ass and the left's ass. And that's real good. And then I would switch. Henry VIII, my lord. And there's my liege, and now we are coming to indeed the traffic light, and push in the clutch, and it was weird. It totally worked. It came from him. I mean, we'd always played around with this, obviously, but it was genius. So it's so interesting that you say that one is do it in a silly accent, because it does. It just takes all the strings
out. It takes the edge off, because so many people think that voice in their head is God. It knows everything, and it really isn't. And to demote it by singing it or with a silly accent is a really.
Now, would you say that's neurolinguistic? Would you say that's NLP?
That's an NLP. Did I get that originally from NLP? Possibly.
Okay.
Next didn't come from NLP. That might have come from NLP. Another one, I think this one did come from NLP, is if you just maybe close your eyes and listen to something that voice might say, and notice whereabouts inside your head does it come from?
Oh, that's good. Like geographically, where in the head?
Geographically, whereabouts. So for me, if I did that, it would be fairly far back on the left.
Back in the limbic system there, yeah.
Okay, and then if you move that voice to the midline.
Go on.
It's almost certainly going to change.
Just trying it now. It does.
It does. It changes.
I said to myself, you silly bastard, in my back left, and I moved it to the midline. And the word bastard went away. That's interesting. Silly stayed, which is good. I like silly.
Yeah. Changes it when you move it to the midline.
Interesting. Now, why the midline?
Well, it's where both brain hemispheres maximally overlap, it's where we've got the corpus callosum. I can't tell you anything more neurologically than that.
Okay.
What there is that seems to work for everybody, that the voice either goes away or changes. And you go to the midline. And then I also have an exercise that involves blowing up balloons in a rather unusual way. It's on YouTube. And if you blow up balloons in this way, you end up virtually always with total quiet inside your head.
Can you be more specific? Take us through this balloon thing.
When you blow up a balloon normally, you put it in your mouth to breathe into it, and you take it out of your mouth, take the next in breath, put it back in your mouth and breathe into the balloon. Okay? In the version that we do, you have to keep the balloon in your mouth the whole time, and you're not allowed to pinch it off. Okay? And you're not allowed to stick your tongue in the hole.
Okay.
So you have to breathe in through your nose, and that involves you have to put your tongue, the tip of your tongue, up against the roof of your mouth to block off the back of your mouth and your throat. And then you blow into the balloon. So as you do that, the pressure in the balloon is getting bigger and bigger with each in-breath. You need pretty big balloons.
Okay.
And you have to make sure the balloon does not empty itself into you. That means you have to have the same pressure in your insides as the balloon. So when you breathe into the balloon, your internal pressure mustn't get less. You've got to hold your ribs expanded.
Okay. You're doing this as an imaginary exercise.
This is a real exercise. We do it with real balloons.
You do it with an actual balloon. I was going to say,
we do it with real balloons.
Complex without one. Okay, neurologically, what does this do?
That's a very good question, and I don't really know the answer to it. But that level of internal pressure gets people quiet inside their head. So in other words, blowing up balloons like that is a shortcut to learning to meditate.
Okay, so it's circular pranic breathing, effectively, but in a practical context.
In a practical context.
Yeah, that can. Now, how did you end up with that one?
It actually didn't originate with me. It originates with a group called Postural Restoration. The originator of that is a physical therapist. They're based, I think, in Wisconsin. And Postural Restoration, they came up with blowing up balloons as a way of helping people increase the pressure in their insides and breathe more and maybe into one side of their ribs. So there's a whole load there that can really change the body.
Why did you find them? Whoa, that's a fairly obscure.
I found them through somebody who is a physical therapist, trained in their method, very experienced in it, who came on a clinic with me.
Okay. Right.
Actually, I found it before then. Somebody came on a clinic with me who had somehow done it and showed it to me there. And we were doing it for years. And then I met somebody who was really active as a physical therapist and a practitioner of postural restoration. And for anyone who only in the US probably can get themselves access to a physical therapist that does this, it is a super way to work with your body to become more functional.
So for dealing with anxiety effectively?
That's not their main aim, but that could be a good byproduct. Their main aim is to get people more symmetrical, breathing better, spine more functional, out of pain, able to do what they want to do.
Okay. Postural? Restoration. Thank you. I learn a lot doing these podcasts, as you can imagine.
Yes.
If you're in the equine-assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine-assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine-assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine-assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine equine integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this.
What I love is that you learn from your students. For me, this is a massive thing. I'm always learning as much, if not more, from anyone I'm working with. And I think particularly with riding, so often the power dynamic is toxic. Similarly,
Yes.
honestly, in therapy, it can be, I'm God, I'm imparting wisdom to you. And it just isn't optimal.
Yes. It is vital to the skills I have and what I know now that they were developed in concert with the people in riding arenas with me. The questioning, what did I say that helped the most? How would you explain this? What was the difference that made the difference?
So your students are your mentors to some degree.
My students are my mentors, yes. And, the cutting out the feedback loop from the student back to the teacher is lethal. And it is riding's tradition. I stand and shout at you and you do what I say.
Well, it comes out of the military, so yes.
It comes out of the military. And the most extreme modern day example I heard was of somebody, a very well-known coach in a different country, who used to coach sitting in the gallery with a headset that allowed him to talk to the student, but didn't allow the student to talk back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So that's the ultimate, isn't it? I
was attending a dressage seminar not so long ago with a very, very well-known person, and hearing that person say things in that mock jokey way that isn't jokey. It's actually shaming, but you're now not allowed to come back and say, hey, dude, that's not nice because, no, it's a joke. That was disgusting. That transition was disgusting. I was like, wow, how much are you paying to be told that? How useful is that? As you
is
say,
there any useful information being given about how to do it better?
Indeed. So
actually, can I say something else too? So whilst tradition cuts out the feedback loop from the student to teacher, it also largely cuts out the feedback loop from the horse to the rider.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
So a lot of what I do is amplify that feedback loop. Like I talk of it sometimes like if you wanted to become a wine taster, you'd need labels on the bottles because you'd need to know this is a Chardonnay, this is a Riesling, this is this country, this is American, this is New Zealand, this is 2000 and whatever. Yeah, somebody's got to put labels on the bottles. And it's kind of like that with what the rider's feeling there on the horse. This isn't worth going for. This is not a great feeling. Do a bit more of that. You're getting closer. That's it. Go for that. Okay, now you just hit it. That's what you want. So we're playing hotter, colder on going for a feeling and really trying to get the rider getting to know what to do through the horse's feedback.
Right.
But if you're just a rider going, okay, my horse must do this. He needs to learn this. I need to show him how to do this. Come on, horse. You're not doing it.
Dominant submission.
There's no feedback.
No, absolutely.
So take away either of those feedback loops and you have a very unhelpful, cruel,
limited,
potentially cruel system.
Absolutely. Cruel to everybody. And of course, with the military, cruelty is built in because you actually need it. If you're training people to go and be desensitized to dying in cavalry charges, screaming at them and making them fall off, you could argue, is useful.
Yeah.
But hopefully that's not what we're trying to do anymore.
No.
But it's what we've inherited. You mentioned you didn't mention, I read in your bio, this also intrigued me, and I want to go into your equestrian mentors in a minute. And I also want to go back to this profound despair that we almost hit on and then went away from. But in your bio, talking about other methodologies that have helped you, I noticed Feldenkrais was in there. And it's interesting how often this comes up. I also like it because when ChatGPT tries to do something with it for our subtitling, it always comes back with failed in Christ, which
how funny.
I always think that's something rather delightful.
That's really interesting.
But you, like me, know the great Linda Tellington-Jones. And for those listeners who don't know her, tune into our podcasts with her. She has a lot of amazing insights. She also learned and took a lot from Feldenkrais. Talk to us a little bit about that, because a lot of people don't know about Feldenkrais and how that's actually influenced so many modalities that a lot of people use inside the equestrian world and out. How was it for you? How did you discover it, and what's it given you?
I discovered Feldenkrais when I went to America. So I gave up. I went to London. And a year later, my very good friend from university, we had danced a lot together. She said, "Why don't you come with me? I want to go to the San Francisco Dancers Workshop," which we did for 3 months. And it's not exactly dance therapy, but it's a lot about unstructured dance, using dance to dance your life story, whatever it may be. And we had a Feldenkrais teacher on the staff there. So we were doing a Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons a couple of times a week. And, I think a lot of my problems as a rider stemmed from just so much fight or flight energy being covered over by the give up, collapse energy. I was not body aware. I was not very functional. And this was a very good inroad into body work. And I've got friends who are Feldenkrais teachers. One of my friends described it, I think, rather well as almost like you'll take a movement and tinker with it. Much as you might tinker with something if you can't get a key to turn in a lock, just little movements that tinker with it. And in the tinkering with it, you will find other ways than your habitual pattern. And Feldenkrais is based a lot on getting people doing non-habitual movement and therefore increasing your movement vocabulary. And once you start doing stuff in performance and non-stylized dance, you start to realize that your movement vocabulary is actually really quite limited. 30 seconds is a long time in dance. It really is. So getting to be able to do things in different ways. There's a lovely quote in a book, I don't know if it's still in print, Denise McGluggage, The Centered Skier, one of my favorite quotes. She talks about breaking up clods of habitual movement like a gardener breaks up clods of earth with a hoe. That's what Feldenkrais does. It breaks up clods of habitual movement. And, we've all got our habit patterns, and sometimes I think of it like that neurological connection would be like buses. Buses only go on certain routes, The 128 takes a certain route, and that's all it ever does, backwards and forwards on that route. But Feldenkrais would be like you've got taxis, you've got many more ways, many more minute adjustments. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Perfect sense.
as a rider, you want really fine body control of your pelvic area. That is so badly represented in the brain compared to your hands. No wonder we want to do everything with our hands. There's so much neurology between your hands and your brain, and so little neurology between your pelvis and your brain.
Yeah.
And so learning to develop that neurology and that awareness is a big part of it. So I met Feldenkrais in America, came back, discovered there were two Feldenkrais teachers in London. And this was then in the early 80s, and started having lessons. And I've done a lot of different body work, and Feldenkrais has been one of the most helpful. They do one-on-one sessions, but the class sessions, the awareness through movement sessions, make it affordable for anybody. There are lots of lessons on the internet, some paid for, some free, put out by the Feldenkrais Guild. So it's something anybody can access. And it's really helpful.
One of the things I love about it is that it really emphasizes also subtle movement, that you can
Yes.
find so much variation in really, really small variations, and then what those do neurologically. Now, with the work that we've done, we sort of have to know this. So it helps to create what's called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the protein in the brain that
Yes.
becomes a stem cell that then becomes a neuron, which fires when you move and problem solve, which is why we have optimal cognitive function when we have novel movement, because we're hunter-gatherers, and that's what it requires to be on high alert when you're gathering wild foods or hunting wild animals, because they're dangerous activities for a variety of reasons. And one needs really sharp focus. And of course, as you say, modern life, sedentary life, but also just modern life, repetitive life, we tend to get into these repetitive forms of movement because actually they're functional in terms of earning money and that sort of thing, because we have a job and we move in this way for this job, and we walk to the job to go that way, or we travel to the job in this way.
Yes.
And in school, we're told to move in this way or that. And then we're right.
Yeah, we become very limited in our movements and our body perception.
Right. We don't play anymore. So dance, of course, is a form of play. And this intrigues me because if you had a shaming mum who's not a barrel of laughs, Christian Scientist, where did dance come into this?
There was a ballet school in Ickenham where I grew up. Lovely ballet teacher. My ballet teacher was one of the lovely adults of my childhood. And so I think most little girls in Ickenham went to the ballet school.
But if dance wasn't, a feature of Christian Science and partying, why were you allowed to go to a dance school?
That's a good question. I think ballet is traditional enough and classical enough that it passed muster, and disciplined enough that it passed muster.
Okay. There was enough suffering involved that it was...
There was enough suffering involved, I think, yes. Only it turned out that it was a teacher where there was very little suffering involved. But I think it could have been that there was enough suffering involved that it made the grade.
It's so interesting that this whole thing that things are only worth doing if there's suffering involved. And of course, that's the equestrian tradition we've inherited.
Indeed, yes. If my mother had known how much suffering was going to be involved in my riding, she might have been all for it.
I should have subsidized it completely. That's hilarious. Let's go back to this despair that made you give up riding. Okay. Talk us through that process, that period, because I think many of us have been through that. And of course, this could be in any walk of life.
Yes.
How did it hit you with the thing that you love the most in life, and why?
So I, after university and that year where I didn't do the postgrad teacher training, I went full-time into horses and ran a yard and struggled with my intermediate instructor's exam. I failed that 4 times before I passed it. At that time, you had to pass every module on the same day, which they then
What was
changed.
the block? What was the thing? Was there something you failed at each time?
No, I think first of all, I failed the flat work and the jumping, and then I failed the jumping, and then I failed the flat work, and then I passed all of it.
Okay.
And I wanted to take my eye, so I was sort of ambitious, like I wanted to get these exams, and I knew I wasn't a talented rider. And I ended up working for somebody nobody's ever heard of, but he was one of the few continentally trained dressage riders in the UK in the mid-1970s. His name was Dan Aharoni. He was originally Israeli. And
was that just by fluke that you ended up working for him?
He advertised, I think, in Horse and Hound. I'd been being a working student for Mrs. Starrock, who was one of the fellows of the British Horse Society and renowned for being good at getting people through their exams. I'd been working for her. I'd been eventing in that job and previously. And when this job came up, I thought, maybe I should apply to that. And Mrs. Starrock said, this guy's really good news, go do it. So I got that job. And it was kind of funny because in the interview, I rode Dan's horse. And at one point, I did a half hold. And I knew it was it. Yeah. Did that on that horse. Complete fluke. Quite possibly got the job on the back of that. I don't know. Didn't do another one in the whole 2 years I was there. It was the second one I'd ever done. I did one when I was a student when we went before a competition, so a couple of us, and had a lesson at Fulmer Riding School, which was owned by Robert Hall, who'd been to the Spanish school. And going round a corner on the right rein at the end of the short side on a grey horse called Balago, it happened. And I knew that was it. Yeah. Didn't happen again till that job interview, which was probably about 4 years later. Didn't happen again for, I can't tell you how long, until I got where I could kind of knock those out. I can knock those out now, and have been for a large number of years. But anyway, so I got that job. And it was clear to me immediately that he had a level of skill I had not seen. And he taught me a lot on the lunge. And I had what should have been a brilliant learning opportunity. He would lunge me.
It doesn't sound like a road to despair here.
Sorry?
This does not sound like a road to despair.
No, it wasn't despair at that point. But during that time, it kind of was that he said the same things. And guess what? He said them louder. In response to which I did the same things. And guess what? I did them harder. And so we kind of were like ships that passed in the night. Okay. So it was a double whammy. He showed me what a really good rider could do, but he couldn't teach me to do
But he
it.
couldn't communicate it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot.
So you learned what you couldn't do,
I
basically.
learned what I couldn't do.
Yeah, that
And a
was
lot of horses came into our yard, and I saw these ugly ducklings get transformed into swans.
Mm.
And basically, I couldn't do it. Now, while I was there, I did pass my eye. Fortunately, that was a lot less traumatic than the intermediate. So I did pass that while I was there. I was very scared I would fail the jumping because I wasn't really jumping at that point. I gave up eventing to sit at the feet of the great master.
Mm.
And it was 2 years into that where became really clear that he was losing faith in me. He was teaching me less. I was losing faith in myself.
Mm.
And I had 2 weeks off and I went to Greece on a holiday for young singles. And while I was there, I thought, I have to stop doing this. I can't do this any longer. And it was me going, this is the end of my dream. And I did sell my horse and I quit and I went to live in London.
Wow. And how long did that period of despair last?
So I worked for that guy for 2 years.
But then the period after that, you've sold the horse, you're in London, you don't...
Sold the horse, I was in London. I got involved in psychotherapy pretty quickly. The trip to San Francisco and the dancers workshop.
Okay.
That was also really important. It showed me that that there was a really serious approach to the body, learning about the body. When I was in America, I read, I think, the first of Timothy Galway's books, The Inner Game of Tennis. And I started reading some of the early books on visualization and healing.
Right.
Right? So those books I found in the US possibly before I would have found them in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're in Northern California. Yeah.
Yes. And by then I got back into riding again. I'd gone to London. I didn't ride or teach for about 6 months. And then I got talked into it. And I started with a really blank slate of a beginner's mind. And went to the dancers workshop. Discovered a few things just in the early days of starting again that were really seminal in terms of rider biomechanics. Absolutely crucial that I hadn't understood or been doing. And while I was in America, I went, okay, I'm not just an eccentric riding teacher. There's really something in this. And at some point, I'm going to write a book.
Why at that stage did you feel ready to, or did you feel the book bubbling inside you? Because I'm sure at that stage you were still with a lot of questions and...
I had lots of questions, but essentially, when I started riding again after I'd given up, I discovered core strength. Now, I called it bearing down and still do, but I discovered how to switch on my core. And I discovered that on a horse I was riding for somebody that jogged a lot. And most of the time it would jog and I would pull on the reins and it would pull on the reins and it kept jogging. And then every now and again I could stop it jogging, but I didn't know what I'd done. And when it happened, it was, it was like that. It was in a moment.
And if you were to put that into a few short words now, what did you do that stopped it jogging?
I caught up to the balance point rather than being behind it,
Mm-hmm.
essentially being the water skier to the horse's motorboat.
Mm-hmm.
I caught up to the balance point and I found how to activate my core.
How did you activate your core?
Well, the simple way to answer that is to say, if you clear your throat and just go and put your hands on your abdominals while you do it, you will be feeling and doing what good riders do when they use their core. And one of the things that does is increase the pressure in your insides, which is why the balloon blowing exercise is so useful.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that was just one piece, but it's the pivotal piece.
Right.
Not doing that, and you're riding and pulling on the reins, and most people are sucking their stomach in at that point, and you're going to be the victim of what happens. You will not be able to be proactive. You will always be reactive.
Right. It's very interesting.
I turned it round.
Okay. So, yeah, because core is such a, particularly in riding, it's such a esoteric word. People throw that word out there.
They do.
Without saying what it is.
Yes, we teach people to do it.
Okay, so listeners, Mary Wanless is going to tell you, what is your core? What is your core? What is the rider's core, Mary? And
All right. Well, there are two versions of that.
mm-hmm.
You've got the Pilates version of the core, which is the layers of muscle around your torso from your spine round to your front,
Mm-hmm.
especially the deep layers of muscle. Now, I think of the core a little differently, but I wouldn't have thought of it in the way I think of it now when I learned how to do that. So now I would think of the core like if you cut an apple in half from the end with the stalk to the end with the little thing on it, what you see is a line and then it bulges out and then the line continues to the other end of the apple.
Mm-hmm.
So my version of the core now would be it starts under your feet, under your instep, goes through deep muscles of your calf, the inside muscles of your thigh, your pelvic floor, through your organs, up to the psoas muscles, and also the slings and bags and sacs that contain your organs. Psoas muscles take you to diaphragm and QL, and up through the trachea and your lungs, and so on into your neck, your throat, and your tongue.
Your tongue, interesting.
Yes.
Does jaw come into this as well?
Not really.
Okay.
No, not TMJ, but
Okay.
tongue. And also to agree, chin and roof of your mouth.
Okay. So yeah, up through the palate.
Yeah. So that would be Tom Myers' definition of the core. And he's a guy who's written a book called Anatomy Trains, which is about to come out in its 4th edition, I think. And what Tom has done for understandings of how muscle and connective tissue work in chains is fabulous.
Tom who?
Myers. Myers.
Myers. And
yes, Tom Myers.
Tom Myers. So what you've described really is the inside of a taurine structure, right? You know, we're all taurine structures, meaning we've got, a hole here, we've got a hole at the other end, and there's something in between. And basically we get through life by passing one to the other, and that's what we do. But that's a simple concept, complex process. As you say, many chains of muscles.
But it is possible to learn to really feel those chains of muscles.
How does it help?
In a really helpful way. But when I first stopped that horse jogging, it was just much more about my abdominals and my internal pressure within the abdominal cavity.
What did you do within that abdominal cavity that stopped the jogging?
Or as if I had done that. I didn't do that, but I just hit on being on the right balance point with enough internal pressure and was able to get my seat bones, as it were, to not be moved by the horse, but to take on the slower movements of walk and therefore walk the horse underneath me.
Right. That process is, of course, dependent on a certain amount of rider experience. You've got to feel pretty comfortable up there. It's dependent on a certain amount of physical fitness, not crazy, but a certain amount, and strength. And it's also dependent on, as you say, a certain amount of physical cognition, given that most of us are not brought up to be that embodied, as you say, that to be that in awareness of our bodies. Those three things, if let's say you now take what we call in Germany a Wiederansteiger, so a late rider, late comer to rider, or someone who rode in youth and then took a break and is coming back, which is often, who is now perhaps out of touch with their body. Maybe they're not in great shape. They're certainly nervous up there, worried about falling, and are going to be at the mercy of the horse's movement. What would be the 1, 2, 3 over a certain period of time where you could bring them to that kind of awareness where they could access that call in that home way and actually make it work for them?
If you're talking about somebody who has some riding experience, they might not be very fit. They may not have ridden for a few years. I would say in lesson 1, they will pretty certainly get a glimpse of this working.
Mm-hmm.
They won't be strong in it. They won't be able to hold it. Learning to do that and breathe at the same time is the critical thing. And it's part of what balloon breathing teaches, as well as that quiet mind. And so I would say in lesson 1, people start to get an inkling of this. If you're talking a total beginner, we would still probably early on in lesson 1 introduce the concept.
Okay. So at least intellectually they know it exists. Yeah.
Yes. And working in walk and walk halts is where people begin to get it.
Right.
And if they've got a difficult horse that really has spent its life pulling on the rein and going, which encourages the rider to pull back and lean back and press in their feet and do all the wrong things, then it's not going to be as smooth and easy as if you've got a horse that will stop if you do the right thing. I mean, all horses will stop if you do the right thing, but you may need to be righter than right on a horse that where you've got to go, sorry, honey, we're retraining how you think about the bit. I know you thought it was for leading on, but it's for something different.
Yeah.
So you don't really want to be doing your first lessons with somebody in that situation, but sometimes that's the horse they arrive on and that's what you're doing.
Yeah. No, I got it. I mean, that's why I'm a great believer in putting people on good schoolmaster horses.
Yes.
And creating those horses for your students if you can. One of the other things I know about your methods, which I really believe in, is giving people stuff to do when they're not on the horse.
Absolutely.
So I do half my teaching, I'd say, is not with a pony. It's just with the monkey. And if you're getting certain muscle memories, whether it's for in-hand work or whether it's for ridden work, so that when you're presented with the pony, either at your side or underneath your butt, you can access these muscle memories. Talk to us about what are your main go-tos with this?
Gosh, with dismounted work, well, there's lots of dismounted.
Well, I mean, dismounted without a horse.
Without a horse. Yeah.
Non-pony involved.
Yes. So the real origin of this was, I believe it was 1982. I'd arrived in London. It was a horrible winter. Everywhere was frozen.
Mm.
I got good at giving lessons in walk on frozen arenas.
Okay.
My ability to pay my rent was on the line.
Right.
And after that winter, I thought, I need something up my sleeve in case this happens again. And I invented the idea that one group of clients in South London, somebody had a big house. We'd use her big house, her sitting room. Group of clients in North London, somebody else had a big house. And that we'd do a series of winter workshops on a Tuesday evening or whatever.
The arena is the living room. Right.
The arena, yeah. And so I set that up and people bought it and it was all great. And then I thought, shit, what am I going to do? So I had to come up with some exercises, and one of them was, just sitting in chairs and bearing down. And we didn't have balloon breathing there, but did a whole load with breathing and body awareness and noticing. And I had some sort of martial arts-ish exercises and some Feldenkrais exercises. And I taught mental rehearsal as well. And I put together these workshops. And that was the beginning of the dismounted element of this work. It came out of adversity, as so much does.
Yeah.
And I've just kept added to dismounted exercises. There's so much you can do driving your car. Sitting on 2 seat bones, pushing. If anybody pulls on the steering wheel driving their car, I will guarantee you they're going to be someone that pulls on the reins. Push on the steering wheel, learn to bear down and breathe. Notice what's happening in your mid-back. If you're a woman, it's probably push your mid-back back into the seat of the chair. Most women are hollow-backed. Not everyone, but most. And there's so much you can practice off horse that feeds into on horse. And you can also do exercises that are ahead of where you are in your riding to prepare you for where you're going.
I so agree.
It's so valuable. And it's fun.
It's often, I think, the key between success and failure for riders. Because as soon as you add the pony, it gets complicated for the monkey.
Yes.
If we can simplify things down, take away that pressure, take away that fear, take away the judgment, take away the lot, and just say, this is just having a bit of fun with this thing. But so few riding instructors think this way.
Yes. But they also wouldn't know what exercises to break it down into.
Right.
But the value of it is enormous.
I so agree. I couldn't agree more. Okay, you sold me. I'm coming on your next course. All right. So let's talk about mentors. So when I was having to go down my dressage path and it was because of autism and because of finding that working collection with a child in front of me or not, that the collection was the key. And then I found out from neuroscientists, the collection rocks your hips in this particular way. If it's soft, that's oxytocin. That's what's calming down the nervous system. That's what's opening up the communication. Because oxytocin is not just a feel-good hormone, it's hormone of communication. And oh gosh, okay, so now I need to learn more about this collection thing. Not a dressage rider coming in my 40s, oh shit, I've got to learn this thing. Going and talking to all the dressage people, say, well, it takes 500 years to learn this and not really possible anyway. And someone like you probably can't wear it. And it's really just for a higher priesthood. I'm like, it's got to be possible.
What country were you in at that point?
Many. I've always been but between the UK and America mostly. And so then, of course, I tried dressage lessons and ran into the same wall everyone runs into of, utter confusion and realizing that the horses actually didn't know how to do it and that they were putting me on. So it was all a moot point anyway. And then I started asking, I asked a few professionals who I really trusted, what would you do in my shoes? And interestingly, I got the same answer from 3 of them, which is go to Portugal. And I said, why there? And they said, because it's the last place left where they still produce the dressage horse with the original purpose. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, war. And I said, well, they're not at war with anyone. They said, no, Rupert, it's the bullfight. Portuguese bullfight almost entirely on horseback. You're not trying to kill the bull. You're dancing around it. If there's any hesitation between horse and rider, they're dead in 10 seconds. So they train all their riders on schoolmaster horses from day one. And they train the horses to know everything on the ground before they put the rider on. I thought, that makes perfect sense to me. So I went down there, found it was true. And then, of course, being on these schoolmaster horses, I kept hearing this name, Valença. And through that family, of course, Nuno Oliveira, who created that family. And then since then, through all the, journey that I've had to do with this, the other great mentors of that age coming up, such as Egon von Neindorf and so on and so on. And you have had a really similar trajectory, which I find massively interesting. And because you were, I think, a half a generation back or so, you got to ride with some of the people that produced my mentors, who produced Luis Valença, von Neindorf, who produced a lot of the best riders here in Germany. Can you talk to us about how you found them? Because back then there wasn't an internet, and dressage in the UK, I remember growing up in the Huntfield in Leicestershire, people mistrusted anything that was European. The hangover from World War II was still very strong. We don't like what they do over there. Oh, no. There was a kind of a bit of that attitude. So to find your way into that world was not easy back then. How did you do that? And took us through it.
So Dan, my teacher who drove me to giving up, he had ridden with Nuno Oliveira.
Okay.
And then had what was going to be his horse for the Olympics, who subsequently went lame, with Egon von Neindorf. So I knew those names. And
were you aware of those names before you went to work for Dan? Or did he introduce?
No, I don't think so. I might have been aware of Nuno.
Okay.
I wasn't aware of Egon von Neindorf, but I was aware of Nuno Oliveira. I don't know when his first book came into English. That would be an interesting one to know, but I think it was probably the 70s, early 70s.
I would say the early 70s probably, yeah. But even then, only a fraction of the English riding public would have read them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so there was J.A. Allen, the bookshop in London, the horse.
I remember J.A. Allen.
I used to hang out in there.
Me too.
And I think I probably found my first Nuno Oliveira book in there.
That would make sense.
I also found another really important book by somebody Polish, I think, that was older than that. That gave me some really good clues. Can't remember the name of the guy. But
not
anyway,
Bajowski.
Sorry?
Not Bajowski at the...
No. Yeah. No. So I'd given up. I'd gone to London. I was coaching again. I'd done San Francisco Dancers Workshop. I was trying to get my head around what riding really was. And somehow I got an address for Nuno Oliveira. I don't know how I got the address, who I got it through. But somehow I did. And I wrote and I said I would like to come.
Good for you.
And his daughter, I believe, worked as his secretary and spoke good enough English and wrote good enough English. So I had a booking. I made a booking and went for 2 weeks.
That must have been pretty life-changing.
Sorry?
That must have been pretty life-changing.
It was a funny journey. It didn't go brilliantly well. On the day one, I rode the horse at the back of the ride, and it really shook its head a lot. And I thought it was a head shaker, it was a bit pathological. And I kind of dealt okay with that. And Nuno asked about my background, and I talked about Dan, and he remembered Dan. Then the next day, I rode the horse that was back but one of the ride. And as we walked up the hill to the riding arena, it was clear to me that this horse was very old and pretty cronky. And my spirits just went, oh, I've graduated onto the really old, decrepit one. And I didn't do such a great job on that horse. And at that point, I was really hopeless at the lateral work, which was one reason why I wanted to go there, because I knew it would be lateral work, and lateral work in walk and trot. And after that, I didn't do terribly well. And then we all got invited, along with Nuno, I guess, to go to the school in, is it Ericeira? Where there's a Portuguese, maybe military school still.
In Mafra.
Mafra. It was in Mafra. We all got to go to Mafra. And the horse I rode, we all rode. And then I was in my familiar territory on some 5-year-old other horse, and everybody said to me, oh, you got the nice one. You got and I just kind of went, don't think that's true. But I knew what to do up here. And so that went really well. But the rest of the time I was struggling, and I didn't feel I got told anything that was very helpful. And actually got more help from
I've known a few people who've had this experience there. Yeah.
I would say I got more help from João, Nuno's son, than I did from Nuno himself. But somewhere there, did I hear the name Luís Valencia? I'm not sure. But next time I went to Portugal, I'd found out the right address for Luís, and I wrote, and I was able to make a booking, and I went there. And over the next few years, I probably spent over 3 months in Portugal.
Yeah.
Went quite a number of times.
Yeah.
Luís was delightful.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
And as long as you could uncode 4 languages. So I think one of the I remember the sentence, shorten the escudos and wechseln a gauche.
Yes.
Escudos being Portuguese, wechseln being German, and gauche being French.
Yes.
Yes. Shorten the being English.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there.
If you could decode 4 languages, you could kind of get some help. And we did work on the ground too, which was great. And I felt like I got to ride some nice horses, some interesting horses. I remember one day, I think they were desperate for horses. And I got to ride the horse that was the Capriole horse. And I knew this thing hadn't been out of its stable for quite a few days. So I'm thinking, okay, here we go. And
Back to the eventing days. Right. Yep.
And it grabbed the right rein like there's no tomorrow. And I managed during the course of the thing to kind of undo that and get it a lot straighter. And I can remember all the young guys are going, Merda de Capriola, Merda de Capriola. I thought, oh God, this is good, isn't it? And then we got to Piaf. And the horse stood up on its back legs, and I did what English people did, which was lean forward and put my hands around its neck. And it came back down again. And Louis looked me in the eye and said, I think we know Capriole today.
He's a sweet man.
He's a very sweet man.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was kind of working things out, getting to learn the work on the ground, working things out from the horses, getting a few helpful hints. And that's
Louis
about
is
as
a
good
good
as it ever
explainer.
got.
Yeah.
Yeah. With Egon von Neindorf, when I went there, I spoke no German, he spoke no English, but he was charming. I tried to collect Jawohl, Frau Mary. That was what I realized. What I had to do was try and collect Jawohl, Frau Mary. There were maybe 4 of us in the arena at a time. And my worst moment was when he told everybody to halt and I didn't understand and I'm riding a stallion and it sort of marches its way into sticking its nose up the bum of the horse in front.
Always a good
That
moment.
was my worst moment there. But it was lovely to ride the horses. There were some really nice horses that I learned a lot from there. So I think it was the situation of riding some nicer horses in a situation where things go slowly enough that you can work things out. Learning to do the work on the ground.
Yeah.
And just enjoying Portugal. I still love Portugal.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I stood in that arena with Luis, writing everything down and filming everything and asking everything I could think of to ask. And I realized, oh my gosh, it's a complete system.
Yeah.
And what one needed to do was learn the system by which the horse was built, not the riding, because then the riding would come as a result of having built this horse that was to some degree almost independent of the rider. And oh my gosh, that's gold. And for us, that was the game changer, with horseboy method and so on. But I've seen so many riders, unfortunately, hit the glass ceiling, not because they can't get through it, but because the only set of tools is the riding. And it's just not enough. If one wants to get through that thing into Narnia, there's these other tools as well. And so you going and looking at how these guys were building these horses, even if in certain cases you maybe came away with less, i.e. with Nuno, or with more, perhaps by the time you got to von Neindorf too, you had some inkling of how this old 18th century La Guerinière system was sort of put together, because you'd been seeing it and seeing it and seeing it. And then being one of the first people to bring this kind of systematic approach back to the UK, I think a lot of UK riders owe you a debt for bringing that systematized way of doing things rather than get on and kick, which is what we all grew up with.
You've got to go beyond get on and kick.
You've got to go beyond get on, and you've got to go beyond kick and pull. You've also got to see that your mentor can actually produce these horses and can put you on them. Whenever I'm asked to give advice to someone if they are looking for a dressage instructor, I say there's 2 questions you always need to ask. One is, how did you teach your horse Piaffe? And it's got to be an answer that you can kind of get, not some esoteric wall of words. But I put the hind leg here, and then I put the hind leg here, and then I straighten him, and it happens like that. And the second part of the question is the most important. Can I ride him? And if the answer is no, well, then that person has not produced a universal horse that is happy to show you for 15 minutes
I think
to
the
do.
answer can be no until I've seen you. Something else.
Yeah.
Because there are certainly people doing stuff I wouldn't want to subject my horse to.
Well, no, but for example, with us, we've got, say, here in Germany, 7 schoolmaster horses. Pretty much anybody could come, but I know the tolerance level of each horse. And so if we're showing people, say, okay, this is the Piaffe, and that would be on day 1, so that you can feel in your body just what it is. How long are you doing that for? You're doing that for a few minutes, and you are choreographing it, and you're right there at the shoulder, and you help everything. You don't just sort of stand in the center of the arena and say, ride, go round and round. And no, I would never do that to my horse. And my horse would put up its middle finger at me if I did. But it doesn't have to be done that way. And so it's basically assisted in handwork. But that assisted in handwork creates a sort of generosity in the horse. And of course, we need that from the horse when we're working with our clientele, with our autistic kids and so on. They're going to sit on that same horse in Piaffe and Passage. And that horse is going to be very happy to give that up because for them, it's an easy thing to do.
And I mean, that's really impressive. And I think there'd be hardly anywhere in the world where that happens. You know, maybe that is a lot of your legacy. I mean, Nuno trained, every horse in Nuno's school had been trained to Grand Prix by him.
Mm.
Then he put the horse in the school and he never ever rode it again.
Mm.
So the inevitable death downhill happened.
Right. And then it's always the rider's fault.
And then you've got the horses at the front of the ride, which are the better horses, and the horses at the back of the ride that are really losing it. And
yeah, no, sadly, that's the same old punitive thing, just with more education. And, you know, a lot of people I know who knew Nuno, you know, said, well, he was, you know, a difficult character, a genius, brilliant, blah, 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 but a difficult. One of the things I love about Luis is that he never does that.
No, he is a generous and delightful soul. There's no two ways about that.
And he'll set you up for success. The reason we do the thing with, okay, day one, put you on Piaffe, is very simple. Outside of the therapeutic model, which is, of course, we're doing it for oxytocin. But on one of the first pages of La Guerinière, you know, École de la Cavalerie, which is supposedly what we're all trying to do. And on, I think, page 3 of Gustav Steinbrecht, they say, take your beginner rider and on the first day, put them on your best horse in Piaffe so that they can feel in their body how it should feel. And then little by little over the coming years, you will bring them up to the level of that horse. And that just struck me as so much common sense. Because if you think about it, when we're learning to jump, you don't put someone on a horse that's never jumped before, right? You put them on the best schoolmaster horse you can, because it's life or death. But in dressage and flat work, we have this idea that you're supposed to kind of hammer at it somewhat blindly, failing a lot until somehow you get it. I don't think that's much fun for the horse. I don't think that's much fun for the rider. And it's inefficient. It just doesn't have to be that shit. But one needs to be shown that other way. And it was Luis who showed me that, you know. So he showed me, create your horse in the Piaffe on the ground, put your rider on, and off you go. But I think by the time I was lucky enough to be working with him, he had systemized it perhaps even more than he had back in the earlier days. And I definitely profited from that, you know. So
yes, I mean, that might well be true. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, that would happen to hardly anybody in the horse world. As in, getting to sit on Piaffe on day one.
It's how we teach all our riders, you know.
Yes, it absolutely is. If you come back to Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Riders, this is begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
So if you've had a sense of that, and in Piaffe, it's not so hard to sit, is it? I mean, it's not like it's throwing you around. There aren't big horses throwing you around. And if you're not getting in your knickers in a twist and trying to generate it and start wiggling and doing all the things that people do, then
because the horse is just going to do it because we're on the ground making it happen. And all we need to say is sit still, relax and smile.
Yes.
And just enjoy this. This back to where we began with this. And I think this is why it's such a great conversation for equine assisted work is it's this element of suffering that things are not worth having unless you suffer. And therefore creating suffering where suffering does not have to be, whether it's in your kid as a Christian Scientist mum, or, you know, and as you say to the point of, well, okay, maybe you can dance if it's a suffering enough form of dance. And as you said, if she'd known how much suffering you were going to have to go through with riding, she might well have subsidized it, ironically. And, you know, what this punitive thing has done to us as a culture, it's, you know, doesn't have to.
And you know, it needs explicit how-to information. And your just sit and Piaffe on day one is putting some information into the nervous system of this is your end goal.
And but you even do this because here you are doing it. Okay, I'm creating it for you, but I won't always.
Yeah.
This is now within your remit of experience. It's not just in your imagination. Yeah.
Yes.
And these things have to happen for all sorts of life skills, right? You mentioned that you were very modestly saying, well, I don't know so much about the equine assisted thing. And I think you've talked us through really, really solid models. I'll just recap what you've been saying. So you were brought up with some suffering. You found that horses were a way out of suffering. You knew this instinctively. But then, like many riders, you found actually when you add monkeys who are suffering to the thing, they bring this suffering sadly to the thing that one is looking to not suffer with, i.e. horses. What to do about that? Profound despair. There you are also in grief. You lose your parents at this very young age. You're lost. You've got nowhere to go. You end up working with youth. And then you discover dance as well. And what is the joy within that? And also embodiment. And then you start to bring that to people who are suffering with riding and help unlock the suffering. Mary, you've been doing equine assisted work your whole life.
Yes. I mean, you could certainly say that. And it is true that the work I teach is life-changing. For a lot of riders, it is life-changing. And it is certainly life-changing for the coaches who get involved. And just being able to learn it step by step and have it be more explicit and have a guide on the journey, like between you have two perspectives. You have the rider's internal perspective, what's going on in their body, their mind. You have the coach's external viewpoint and how they're thinking about it and communicating about it. And if you pit those together to solve a problem, then that's very different to I tell you what to do and you do your best to do it. I haven't given you good information, but do it anyway. Now.
Exactly. And I can't actually get up on your horse and do it for you and show you because I've just learned to say it. I haven't really learned to do it.
Yes.
And it's easier to blame you than to admit that and go and learn.
And having patterns in your neurology and really trying to bridge the gap between that neurological knowing and knowing in language. The gap between language and experience is such an interesting one. NLP really got me interested in that. Yeah. And
the
really
gap
about
between
that.
language and experience.
Or experience and language.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ways to find language to cross that gap. And as well find, sitting on a more trained horse and having the experience of X can help to cross that gap.
Okay, so now we move to the present. You are, one of the people who sitteth on the right hand of God of the, equestrian world in the UK and internationally now. And you've arrived there through this process of seeking answers to questions, answers to suffering, looking for the right mentors and so on. Now, there you are. If somebody wants to engage with Ride With Your Mind and Mary Wanless stuff, how should they begin? What are they going to learn? Now, you might think, well, that's obvious given the conversation we have, but actually it's not necessarily obvious. So for example, I might now, after this conversation with you, say to all our horseboy people, particularly in the UK, why don't you go on a Mary Wanless course? It's going to open up some new ways of thinking. It's going to open up some new ways of looking at things. There's going to be all sorts of parallels. We're going to come away with definitely a toolkit. I will totally come on one of your courses. What other... You start with somebody here. You take them through a journey. Ideally, let's say they stick with you for a bit or with one of your people for a bit. You take them to a journey where? And what's that midpoint? So what's the beginning, the middle, and the end of your program, and how do you get them there?
The beginning would be being on, usually it's their horse. I don't have school horses any longer. Usually it's somebody's horse. They might have begged, borrowed, or stolen a horse, but I watch somebody for a little while. From observing, just see what my priorities are. But, the ABCs of good biomechanics stay the same.
Which are?
How you line up your body.
Okay.
Shoulder, hip, heel. How you support your body weight. That means the thigh works as a lever. The thigh is on the saddle and the thigh works as a lever. how the foot gets to just rest and not press, and how you get to bear down and breathe. Those are the initial kind of things. And doing that often changes the rider and the horse. We're halfway through the first lesson and it's dramatically different.
Okay.
And if it's hard work, it'll be because it's hard work to sell to somebody the idea of doing it different. Yes, but my other teacher said, yes, but I've always done this. Yes, but surely that can't be right. If it's hard work, that's why it's hard work. If somebody's willing to play with me, it's not hard work at all from my perspective.
Okay.
And it's a lot more fun from theirs.
And do they find it, as long as they're not mentally resisting, it's actually surprisingly easy and accessible?
It's very accessible. It's doable. It's hard to maintain. There's always a pull back into old habits.
Sure.
There's always a pull back into old habits. So people start to get the idea that all you do is go, lost it again, and redo it. Lost it again.
And not to panic, not to tense up, not to try and bust your way.
And every time that happens, they're changing them and pretty soon get to feel how that changes the horse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a beginning point. And we get people doing a good job in walk, halt, rising trot mechanism. That gives a kind of baseline. They're then sane and safe and sensible in some areas, we hope. And it's how to do what you have to do to take away the temptation to pull on the reins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're basically getting people out of kick and pull.
Yes, we're getting them out of kick and pull. Then in the mid stages of this, it's learning to do it going faster and do it during transitions and just peeling away patterns, both rider patterns and horse patterns, and trying to get a more wholesome interaction and ways of talking about that and understanding it and turning change into bite-sized chunks, what I call next step fixes.
Mm-hmm.
And really getting the rider doing what I call riding on interface, which would be the rider discovering for themselves the cause-effect rules of the rider-horse interaction. So kind of when I do A, the horse does B. When I do C, the horse does D, and that's reliable. And if the horse does X, I do Y. Shoots out from underneath me, I lean back and pull on the reins. I support my body weight better. It comes up through its back. All these kind of things. So there are rules. My first sense as a physicist, there have to be rules of cause and effect. There has to be a science under the art. There is. It's well hidden, but it's there. And talented elite riders stumble across it by magic, but can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And as that process goes on, I don't know that there's an end, but it becomes more that I fix something in me and feel how that fixes in the horse, to where you can go, oh, my horse needs more X, and fix you in a way that changes the horse. Right? So it can become, it's being able to feel and sense your way into the entirety of your body and the entirety of your horse's body.
Do you have exercises psychologically and emotionally for accessing away from the horse the thing we're trying to get to on the horse, which is joy? Right? The only reason any of us ever got on a horse was because we thought it might make us feel better or good or something. Very rarely did any of us get on a horse because we actually needed to ride to Edinburgh. There was a time in life when that was going on,
Yes.
but not anymore. So everyone who gets involved with horses is coming in for joy. We know then that can get lost. Through, obviously, dance, NLP, the work you've done with Feldenkrais, psychotherapy, and so on and so on, these are all, of course, ameliorative, although dance actually can be just very joyfully expressive. Do you actively try to help people just plain old access joy? And then say, okay, now you've got that thing. Can we bring that thing into the saddle with you?
I would say it starts more in the saddle with that.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to get people to access is flow.
All right.
So
yeah.
Joy is a subset of flow.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
And flow is this state where you're totally absorbed in a task you're doing. You're having no extraneous thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Time's going by. You may be unaware of time. And my aim when I go in a riding arena is to get myself into that state, to help the rider get into that state, this is maybe sticking my neck out anthropomorphically, but to get the horse into that state.
Oh, or at least have that intention. Yeah.
So that's my intention when I go in a riding arena. And I think everybody's greatest joy in life actually comes from being in flow.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty true. You must be working with a lot of instructors too.
Yeah.
What's your mechanism with them to help them access that sense of flow and also to prioritize flow?
I teach them what flow is.
Okay.
As I talk about it in workshops, as well as they've started to experience it on a horse and in teaching. So I'm really trying to get people there in their teaching as well as their riding. And I think quite often it gets people there more there in life. I mean, I think I live my life to a large extent in flow. And when I can do that in everyday menial tasks as well, that's great. So flow is, I think, the bottom line on that. And I also do encourage people to ride out as well as ride in the arena. And, when I ride out, I always have something I'm working on that'll just be something in my body and my horse's body, just quietly, even if we're just hacking along. And there's no pressure in that. You can take your time. And one of the biggest things in this, I think, is teaching the noticing skills of teaching people to check in. Yeah, elite riders never check out. But teaching the average rider to check in, what's happening now? Oh, I hold my back again. Right?
Yeah, and not having
to
to
be
do a
able to
whole
ride by the seat of
self-beating
their
up.
pants.
Say that again?
People think they ought to be able to ride by the seat of their pants. And yet so many people come back to riding as adults after however many years. And maybe as a kid, they did ride by the seat of their pants and they did have a lovely pony and it all worked. But you come back at 50-something with many more what ifs in your brain and the seat of your pants doesn't work any longer.
Yeah.
And often people are shocked by this.
Yeah.
So, getting to check in, to keep checking in.
Yeah, without negative
big
self-beating up language. Yeah.
Yeah, not beating yourself up, but just checking in a non-judgmental way.
Yeah. There's that
non-judgmental awareness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the difficulty about sport instruction, because sport instruction always has the implication that there's a judge, know, and of course you will never meet that judge's expectations. And I agree with you so much about being outside in nature while you do it. It's actually gotten to the point outside of our therapeutic work, which we almost entirely do in nature, unless weather forces us inside, just because arenas are relatively sterile environments, in terms of introducing a brain. Two things: you want the outside world. But I've now gotten to the point with dressage, I almost never teach in an arena anymore. I'll do almost the entire thing in the forest, because I've just noticed that people and horses are happier there. And then occasionally, if there's something where, okay, we could benefit from the wall, or we could benefit from the fence, or we could benefit from a corner here. Okay, let's go back to the arena for that one thing. But it's so interesting how just the very presence of an arena brings pressure.
Yes, it's true.
Gladiatorial.
And it's sad, certainly in the UK, we have increasingly little safe riding.
So true.
Off-road riding, to have access to the outdoor without tying yourself up in a juggernaut,
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right.
Not to be taken for granted.
No, it's true. And when I was a boy, we would hack to a meet of hounds that was anything up to an hour away and might finish after dark and hack the lanes home for 2 hours. You couldn't think about doing that now.
No.
You'd be killed. Yeah.
I used to ride out hunters for somebody when I was at university in Bristol. We rode along the A38, which is one of the main roads from Bristol going north up to Gloucester. I brushed with some of my known lives along that road, but you wouldn't dare do it now.
No, you wouldn't. And back
crazy then.
Yeah, and you're right. There isn't the public access in the UK. I'm lucky here in Germany because you can basically you can ride. There's tracks everywhere and you can just go. But I never experienced that outside of places like the Welsh borders or areas of open hill.
Yes, and then there are places. Yeah. I mean, I rode a lot on Exmoor in my university days. And God, I love it there. It's one of the best riding in the UK and probably the world.
Yeah, I agree. So yes, there's, and it's true that one then needs ways to kind of humanize the arena. We do that with autistic kids. We will create forests in the arena. We'll have trees that we bring in, and like you're setting up jumps, we'll set up a forest, or
Right. Okay.
we'll turn it into a beach, and we'll have couches
Yes.
and even a little fire going, and, a sofa, we'll bring that, and anything we can think of to kind of humanize it. But it's so easy to just think in terms of, I am doing this task here. I'm working my horse. I'm not playing with my pony. So even that language of, it's always serious. It's always a horse. It's never a pony. It's always a rider. So I try to use the word monkey, got sky monkey, ground monkey, front monkey, back monkey, anything to just sort of take the seriousness out of it, because of this pressure that the arena is a place where you go to sort of suffer and die on the sand. And either Caesar puts his thumb up or puts his hand down.
Yes, it's kind of like that. Yes, can be. I mean, thank God that is on the way out. But
it is on the way out.
There is not enough really good, sane understanding and coaching on the way in.
Yeah.
There is some, not enough.
Well, you've been, I think, one of the big forces for humanizing the entire thing. And I think that one of the reasons why the UK is where we are actually with sport riding, that suddenly we can beat the Germans, I think it's largely down to people like you making these processes available to people. But outside of the sport riding, just to help people connect joyfully with their horses, I do think there's a whole generation of riders, 2 generations of riders in the UK who owe you a great debt. So it's been massively educational for me, but also a great honor for me to have you on here, because you've really contributed in this massively positive way to the
I think there's been a level of me kind of pushing up from the bottom, and some of the big name, really good riders pulling up from the top and inspiring from the top. And I think there could be some truth in that my influence is bigger than I probably realize in terms of. Just
I think
seeping into
you
the
should
culture.
savor that truth, because it's good work that you've done and continue to do. So if people want to come and learn with you, how do they do that? And then how can they find your books? And can they learn with you online as well as live?
Yes. So my website is mary-wanless.com. That has information.
Lower, please.
Mary-wanless.com.
Mary-Wanless,
WANLESS.com.
Okay.
That's got information on the courses I teach in the UK and the US.
All right.
And it's got information on coaches who are accredited in this work, mostly in the UK and the US, but Australia and New Zealand, a little bit in Europe too. The website dressagetraining.tv, which is a membership site, puts my
training, all one word.
Dressagetraining, all one word, .tv.
Okay.
Puts my work online.
What can people do on there?
They can watch webinars. They can watch what we call the Rider Biomechanics course, which is broken down into bite-sized chunks of what it is that the rider needs to do with their body to make it work. There are other courses on things like steering, straightness and sideways, the baselines of on the bit and what that really means, and how to influence a horse's posture and movement. There's also the groundwork that we do based on giving the horse a conscious understanding of the legs as go and the reins as woe. Equine learning theory is where we start in groundwork. And you can send in little bits of video. If you're doing some of the courses, you can send in little bits of video and get feedback on them.
Right.
And I've met people who've really taught themselves to ride on the internet.
Yeah,
never sure that could happen at the beginning, but it really can.
I so agree with you. And I think
taught themselves to ride on the internet.
I was very skeptical about that, and I've absolutely seen people who've done it. What does it cost to be a member on your website?
It's going up fairly soon to 25 quid a month.
Okay.
And you get access to a huge amount for that.
Okay, great. And then your books. Tell us about the books.
Yeah, so I've written 7 books. 3 are still in print. So there's Ride With Your Mind Essentials, Ride With Your Mind Clinic, and Rider Biomechanics.
Okay.
And sometimes people find the older books in car boot sales. There's a couple of people I know who've got very involved in my work that found one of the early books in a car boot sale. So there's
We'll probably find them online too. I mean,
yes,
second-hand books.
there will be eBay and other places that might work better than that nowadays. But those 3 books are a good trilogy.
Okay, just give us the titles again for those who didn't get to a
Ride
pen.
with Your Mind Essentials.
Ride with Your Mind Essentials.
That's the place to start. That's the sort of beginning ABC.
Okay.
Ride with Your Mind Clinic, which is a series of lessons.
Okay.
And talking about it through the experience of the rider in the lesson. So there's a lot of photographs in that book.
Mm.
And Rider Biomechanics comes in through the model of the fascial net and fascial lines and like that understanding of the core of the body and how to access your own fascial lines and how that helps you organize the horse's fascial lines and how that whole system works.
Okay. And fascia for the listeners.
So fascia would be the connective tissue. So in the history of dissection, like everything, they kind of cut it into little pieces and went, oh, this muscle begins here and it goes to there and it does this. But if you turned the scalpel on its side, you could go, okay, so here's the joint capsule and here's the ligament and here's the tendon and here's the muscle. And there at the other end is another tendon and another ligament and another joint capsule. And if you keep going, turning the scalpel on its side, you can create chains of muscle and connective tissue, some of which go from head to toe.
Mm-hmm.
So they're almost like guy ropes within the body.
Yeah.
And getting those guy ropes to have an appropriate and balanced tension makes a huge difference.
Biotension.
The rider actually is using her own fascial net to change the horse's fascial net when it goes really well.
Perfect. Okay. And fascia, I think, is something which used to be one of those words you'd hear, and it's now becoming more familiar.
It is. So Tom has done a lot to bring that into public awareness. And there are more and more people looking at this sort of systems approach to the body. And then there was actually a medic who started talking about fascia because there's some talk about how cancer cells migrate through the body, through the fascial net.
Okay, interesting.
And that became the medical discovery of it. Whereas outside of directly medical circles, there was a lot of research already going on.
Right. And if dysfunctional cells can move through the fascial net, then presumably functional things can too.
So the fascial net is actually the basis of our feel sense. It has way more receptors that send information to the brain about feel than muscles do.
Mm.
And it has to be taught. It's also the organ of force transmission in the body. And to transmit force well, it has to be taught.
Taught as in T-A-U-T.
T-A-U-T.
I can see another podcast coming on.
So it has to be taught. So anyone who's told to relax and just goes, oh,
yeah,
not going to do a good job because that's too soggy and too like a rag.
Right. So what you're talking about is relaxation in tension, right? Like a dancer. Enough tension, but not so much tension that it's rigid. Enough
tension, but you're not uptight.
Indeed.
But you're not too down loose either.
Yeah. Which is rather difficult when your amygdala is firing and you're sitting on a horse that you're worried is going to unload you. Yes. So there lies the art. And I think you help people get that. I'm really grateful that you came on. I'd like to have you back, actually, now that you've opened up this thing about fascia and feel, because I'm a great believer that a lot of rider feel comes through the fascia and that this is something that can help people. Because, when you and I were growing up, there was this myth that, feel can't be taught. It can totally.
Yes, no, this is definitely not true. Feel can be taught.
I so agree. And I'm so
easier for some people than others, but feel can be taught.
Absolutely, like a language. Well, fantastic. Mary-Wanless.com, dressagetraining.tv, the membership education site. We have the books. Mary, thank you. I've learned a lot. I hope you'll come back on because I think there's further things we could explore. And we tend to get a fair amount of questions coming through from the listeners. So perhaps with your permission, I'll collate some of those and then maybe we could regroup in a few months and look at those.
I'd be happy to do that. A pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine-assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine-assisted field or are considering a career in the equine-assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.